Hello everyone, welcome to my film review show. Today we're going to be talking about MAXXXINE. This was directed by Ty West, and this is the third installment of the X sort of trilogy. Though I don't really want to call it a trilogy because I think Ty West plans to make more sequels out of this thing. He wants it to be sort of like one of those like old slashers that just keep getting sequels, like Friday the 13th or Halloween, stuff like that. But for now we'll call this the third installment of the X trilogy. I remember I saw the first two installments at a theater as a double feature, and all three of these films are kind of pastiche films, pastiche in terms of like the filmmaking style, that are sort of based around the time period in which they're set in. So for X, it was, kind of it was like a 70s slasher a la Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then with Pearl, it kind of had this like 1930s, 1950s sort of Technicolor kind of pop. And this film is definitely kind of one of those like 80s hangout films that are also like, an 80s slasher, like, I don't know, fucking Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, that's what I'm thinking. And with X, I remember I did enjoy X. I remember it being like a very, very fun, very like gritty, not gritty, but grimy, that's what I'm looking for. Grimy, kind of like grindhouse, like raunchy slasher. Again, kind of akin to like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, though it did feel like the pastiche did feel a little overwrought at times. But I did like the film overall and kind of the vibe it was going for. But I also felt like the themes of the film were a little questionable. Like, I didn't think they were very well fleshed out, and it kind of left me feeling a little perplexed about maybe the portrayal of old women in horror. And that's obviously like that problem goes beyond Ty West, but I don't know. I felt like they were trying to hint at something about like the obsessive artist and this fear of aging and this fear of like becoming something that's like undesirable or becoming like, I don't know. I just think that it touched on it, but it didn't really explore it, and I was left feeling a little, again, perplexed. And then we get to Pearl, and Pearl is sort of like the origin story of the old lady, who is played by Mia Goth. All of these central characters, Pearl and MAXXXINE, are played by Mia Goth. And let me tell you, Mia Goth is a fucking showstopper of an actress. I mean, she is like one of the great young performers I think we have today. And she really cements that for me in her performance as Pearl in the second film. That is like one of the great like horror performances that I've seen in a long time. She just has, I don't know, it's like she has that sort of like 70s star quality, like a Shelley Duvall type, where she's got like this innocence to her, but then she's like, I don't know, there's something so ferocious about her. Or maybe like a Isabella Gianni, though I wouldn't say quite as like uncanny. Isabella Gianni definitely has this sort of like, I don't know, it's different. It's different, but Mia Goth's great in Pearl. I think it's one of the best performances of that year, and I think it dives deep more into like the psychology of Pearl, which I found really interesting. And I also just, they went for the whole Technicolor look, and I just think it looked better in general. But I really, really loved Pearl. It's one of my favorite horror films that has come out in the last few years. And so naturally, I was interested to see where Ty West would go with MAXXXINE. And, there's definitely like, I feel like I feel a similar way about MAXXXINE that I do about X, though maybe a little less of the good and a little more of the bad, unfortunately. I mean, as always, Mia Goth is like, I mean, she's just a great actress, so no matter like what the role is, I think that she'll usually pull out a good performance. But even in this, you know, I felt like maybe I felt like maybe she was a little checked out, especially like after seeing Pearl. I was like, I don't know, maybe I set my expectations too high after that performance, but I mean, it really is such a showstopper. But I also I felt that even in X, she had more of a ferocity to her than she does here. I feel like she was maybe, not that she was phoning it in, but that it just felt I just felt a little disconnect there. And maybe part of that is just the writing. I think the way the story is written and the way the story kind of carries out is quite underdeveloped, and I don't know, like, again, this film is set in the 1980s, and it's, you know, set 10 years after the events of the first film, and, you know, Ty West is very into that kind of 80s pastiche, and it is all over this film, and I found it a little distracting sometimes, just because I feel like he's so focused on, like, creating the pastiche world, and he's, like, definitely a very talented filmmaker, but it kind of comes at the expense of really fleshing out the character of Maxine and sort of her troubles and her kind of psychological torment. Like, it's all hinted at, right? But it's never really fully explored. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that he wants to make this like a big like film franchise, that maybe he'll explore it a little more in future films, but as it stands, I just find it to be a little lazy. I think, unfortunately, also the rest of this cast is not really pulling their weight. I really did not like Moses Sumney in this, and I love Moses Sumney. Okay, I love his music, but his performance in this was so wooden, and I just don't know. I don't know if he's been in other films or TV shows or whatever, but I don't know. It's not looking pretty. I was kind of conflicted about Giancarlo Esposito's character. Like, on one hand, like, I mean, yeah, he's not really, like, doing anything super special here, but also I could also potentially see it being, like, you know, he's kind of like an 80s badass kind of character, and it's a bit of a caricature of that. Which I guess I could see if that was like your intention with the character, but I don't know. It just, it felt a little, I was just a little underwhelmed in general. And especially with, I don't know who the actor was who's playing Maxine's father. Actually, let me look it up. Simon Prast, who I guess now I'm also realizing was the sort of evangelical like preacher on the TV in the first film, which I guess kind of ties that together. But I also I found his performance to be very laughable. I don't know, maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset for it. Like, it kind of maybe was supposed to feel a little like kind of 80s schlocky, but I don't know. I feel like if you're gonna do that, I feel like you should commit to it, because I didn't feel like it was really going for that while I was watching it. Like, I don't know. I felt like, to me, it just kind of like was a bit of a tough sit through with some of the performances. But beyond this, you know, again, there's so much focus on the pastiche. You know, they play lots of like 80s sort of like arena rock music, like during some very emotional scenes, and like, you know, it's fun and all, but I don't know, it feels kind of like an empty pastiche, and that's kind of been my problem with Ty West as a filmmaker, with the exception of Pearl. You know, these other two films, it just gets so wrapped up in the pastiche that it forgets to tell a compelling story and like even have compelling horror, because the horror in this, you know, like, there's that one scene where there's a murder, and I'm not going to say who it is and who's doing the murder, obviously, but you know, you see sort of like the hand, the gloved hand of the killer moving the knife like this. It's more like this, right? And it's kind of in frame like that, and I guess that's sort of meant to be like it feels like an homage to like a Psycho, like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which becomes apparent later when the director of the film that Maxine is starring in literally like takes her to go see the Norman Bates hotel, the Bates Motel, like the actual Bates Motel from Psycho, which for me was a little bit of an eye roll. But yeah, I don't know. It's stuff like this, you know, like there's sort of an interest in like horror as like a pop culture, you know, moment, but it never really feels like it's transcending that pastiche into something, you know, all his own. Again, I noticed more the pastiche than I did the actual film, and that's a problem for me. I'll say it was fun overall. I feel similarly to about X that I do about this, that it was fun overall, and I think there's good things about it, and it's definitely visually like quite a feast, but it ultimately left me feeling a little cold, a little empty, and I think this film is actually a little worse. Just because it really falls apart in its third act. It really did not stick any sort of landing in terms of that. Whereas with X, at least there was a lot of intrigue at the end. You know, I kind of felt like the middle section was maybe a little clunky, and then the ending really got to me. And, you know, it wasn't perfect, but it really made me interested in seeing what they would do next. But, you know, I don't hate the film. I just think it was a little disappointing, especially after such a great character study like Pearl. If you're looking for like a fun, schlocky kind of horror film, you know, I mean, this will do the job. It's just nothing special, I think. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.